the 2021 Vet Zoom series. We will start this up again after the holidays, so maybe January, February. So we would appreciate any feedback you might have about what you liked, what you didn't like, topics and speakers. That all that's helpful as we plan for next year. I think Molly said, put your questions in the chat and I'll read them. And as if I need to ask them right away, we'll do that. Otherwise we'll, wait till Lisa takes a breath, Dr. Borzynski. But I just want to tell you a little bit about her before we get started. She's a native of Racine, Wisconsin. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin School of Vet Med in '93, so a year before me. And she's been part of the Wisconsin Equine Clinic team since 2006, specializing in sport horse medicine and lameness. Dr. Borzynski is an FEI veterinarian, and she's going to explain what that means, and has been working at international competitions since '99, including WEG, the World Equestrian Games, and the Olympics. She's a lifelong horsewoman, actively competing in eventing, hunters, and jumpers. Lisa, her husband Bill, and their daughter Quinn live in Eagle, Wisconsin, and currently own 6 horses. Wow. Okay. So Dr. Borzynski, it is all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for attending, and I'm very excited to share my experience in Tokyo. We were very lucky that we had a Tokyo 2020, even though it was held in 2021. There was a lot of discussion even up until the week before of whether or not it was even going to happen. So all of us that were there were very, very grateful and thankful that we actually did get to make it. So I'll talk a little bit about, first of all, my background. Oops, shoot. Uh-oh, let's see now if it's gonna let me. Oh, there we go. Okay, so my background, as Lydia said, is in primarily eventing. I have done some dressage and some hunters and jumpers. I currently do work at Wisconsin Equine Clinic. I have competed in the FEI levels, and so just to talk a little bit about what that means, in case any of you aren't familiar with the FEI, that's the International Equestrian Federation, and they are the international governing body for equestrian sports. So there are 8 disciplines that fall under the FEI regulations: dressage, show jumping, eventing, combined driving, vaulting, endurance, reining, and Paralympic. And so the difference between the USEF, our US Equestrian Federation, versus FEI veterinarians are primarily that at USEF competitions, we have veterinarians on site to help basically be there for emergencies or for drug testing. But the FEI is a little bit stricter. So they are based in Europe. They have very strict medication rules, and their goal is to monitor the health and welfare of horses throughout the competition, and make sure that we have a fair, level playing field. So at an FEI event, we'll have many veterinarians involved. So the head veterinarian is called the veterinary delegate, and they're basically part of the judging or the ground jury group. There will be an associate delegate that assists at bigger events. We have a veterinary services manager who manages the treating vets and kind of the other people that are supporting it. We'll have, for large competitions such as Kentucky, the big 5-star events, the World Equestrian Games, and at the Olympics, we have veterinarians that are called field of play veterinarians. So they are veterinarians that are out on course during all the competition and during training to monitor horses. Then there may be private or team veterinarians. So those are veterinarians that come with the individual riders in some cases, or with the team, and they will be strictly working with those veterinarians or with those horses and riders. And then there are also testing veterinarians. So we have a lot of people that get involved. And obviously for a smaller event, we don't have, quite as many people, but the larger the events, we may have, for example, at the Olympics, there were in all, well, we had 20 of us working for the FEI, And there were an additional probably 25 veterinarians that were involved with various teams. We had 50 countries that were represented, and not all of those teams brought their own vets. But for example, the US team, which is a little bit richer country, had a vet for the dressage team, for the show jumping team, and the eventing team. So they brought 3 of their own vets. Germany, Great Britain had their own vets, not necessarily one for each team, but so there were probably in all about 20 to 25 team veterinarians that came for the various disciplines, some of them just for dressage, some just for show jumping, some for eventing, and in some cases they came for all 3 disciplines for that particular team. But because we still had another 30 or so countries that weren't represented, the FEI team then took care of those horses, as well as our duties of monitoring the health and welfare throughout the competition. So at an FEI event, there are various steps that we take to examine the horses throughout the competition to make sure they're healthy. So as soon as they arrive, we do an arrival exam before they even really enter the stabling. So as soon as they come off the plane or the trailer or whatever, we are examining them for anything contagious. We're checking their identification, microchips, their passports. All international competitions, all these FEI horses are required to have a passport, which has all of their health information and identification in it. So we make sure that all the information is correct. We do temperatures, pulse, respiration. We look for, any cough, nasal discharge, anything that might be contagious. If so, we have very strict biosecurity rules. They are required to have influenza vaccinations, so we have to check that. And then we just make sure that they don't look like they are any worse for the wear from their travel. So that's just the arrival exam before we even start the competition. And then we'll talk a little bit about this later, but then we do several of what we call formal horse inspections, or the jog. So we jog the horses before they start the competition to make sure they're sound enough to compete. And then depending on the discipline, we jog them several times throughout the competition, in the case of eventing or some of the other sports. And then we also are monitoring them throughout the competition. So we have veterinarians at all of the training areas and what we call the field of play, all the arenas, to monitor the horses for any injuries. Blood is a big deal. So anytime we see any kind of blood on a horse, not only for the horse's welfare, but also for the sake of our sports, to be able to continue to have sporting competitions with all of the welfare issues that we run up against. We want to make sure that we're presenting our horses in the very best light. Having said that, now there actually were some issues, not at all involved with FEI horses, but many of you may have seen at the Olympics associated with the modern pentathlon. That was a completely different sport, not under FEI rules. They weren't even at the same venue, so we never even saw those horses. But if that were an FEI sport, that would have been discontinued a long time ago. So the FEI does not approve of those types of methods. In fact, riders get warnings, they can be disqualified, they can receive very high sanctions for any kind of abuse of the horse. So they're monitored very closely throughout. So
Dr. Borzynski, if I could just summarize then, or make sure that I understand this correctly, and you say yay or nay. So you didn't go there as a team vet for US, you were hired by FEI.
Correct.
And so which one of those roles did you play of the ones that are listed in the second bullet point?
So I was involved with basically the field of play and treatment. So there were 2 veterinary so most competitions will have a foreign veterinary delegate. So we had a foreign veterinary delegate from Japan. Yves Rossier from Canada was the veterinary delegate. And then Emily Sandler-Burtness from California was the associate veterinary delegate. And then we had a team of 20 of us that were running the on-site veterinary clinic that I'll show you a bit about, and then
Okay.
also field of play. So we had 20 of us
good.
from 12 countries. There were 5 of us from the US. And yeah, so
And then just a reminder to everyone to turn themselves, I'm going to put myself on mute after this. And so then we don't hear any background noise. Okay.
okay. So how did I get to go? So I am an FEI veterinary delegate for eventing. So I have acted as the head veterinarian for competitions. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm in Kentucky as the head veterinary delegate for the Mid-South Kentucky 3-day event. And so I'm here all week as the veterinary delegate. But I've also worked at international competitions, starting with the formerly known as Rolex, the Land Rover Kentucky event for about 22 years, and various other international events. And then I was part of the team that worked at the World Equestrian Games in 2010 and 2018. And it was after the Tryon 2018 that I was asked to join the team for the Olympics. So we were all excited and ready, prepared to go last year after several years of planning. And then that was postponed. But as I said, was very happy to be able to go this year. So getting there was a big ordeal. Again, just because of the COVID situation and the fact that the Olympics as a whole were up in the air up until the very last minute. Unfortunately, the COVID situation in Japan was not good, and things were spiking in other places around the world. But the Japanese people at the time that they were making decisions about whether or not to continue, only had a vaccination rate of about 15% for various reasons. So the Japanese people were protesting. There were a lot of concerns. For the previous year and a half, they had set into play these what they called the playbook. So we had very strict rules for getting there. For while we were there, we were basically, each sport was in a bubble. So unfortunately, it wasn't the full Olympic experience because we were all isolated and segregated by sports. We didn't see any of the other athletes or any of the other competition. But like I say, we were just all happy to get there in the first place. I had 5 COVID tests in the 3 days before I went, and then had a 6th one when I arrived at the airport in Japan. Everyone had to go through several hours worth of testing stations and questionnaires and exams before they would even let us out of the airport. I was lucky and got out in about 3 hours. Some people spent 8 hours at the airport trying to get through all the biosecurity, but eventually did make it. So these were some pictures. The first one, the upper left, I don't know if you guys can see my little cursor, but this was actually the view from the plane, and it was actually kind of a cool view because I actually flew over the cross country course. So as I was flying in, so I've got some other pictures of that, and a great view of the city. The other 3 pictures were actually my hotel room, actually 4 pictures. So I was really lucky and had this amazing room with a great view and actually could see the Tokyo Stadium from my hotel room. So that was perfect, even though we couldn't go there. We drove past the rings several times on the way back and forth to the cross country. And that's where some of the other Olympic venues were, is out in the harbor. So how did the horses get there? So I found this actually on the FEI website, which I thought was kind of interesting. So we had about 328 horses from 50 countries. They were almost all quarantined in Aachen, Germany ahead of time. So most of the riders for all 3 disciplines, the 3 Olympic disciplines being dressage, eventing, and show jumping. So all of the horses, for the most part, were in Europe to begin with. A lot of the riders, even from Africa and Asia, are based out of Europe because they just don't have those level of competitions there. So it wasn't too much of a hardship for everybody to get to Aachen and do their quarantine for several weeks before they headed out. The only exception were the Japanese horses and then the Australian horses who came directly from Australia. But otherwise, almost every other horse was in Aachen, Germany, and a group called Peden Livestock, who does a lot of the equine transport, coordinated the mass airlift of horses. There were roughly 30 to 40 horses per flight, and they came over staggered groups. So the dressage was the first week of competition. So those horses all came over the week before, and then spent, about 2 weeks there. Then the eventers were arriving just as the dressage horses were finishing up. So there was a little overlap there, but then the dressage horses left, eventers were there, and then the show jumpers came in last. There are roughly 9 attendants per flight, so there are only about 11 seats on the plane with these 30 to 40 horses. They had a lot of equipment with them, and some of it was shipped over ahead of time in containers. So each team could send over a whole container full of their equipment and feed and grain, etc. Yeah, they traveled on large planes, which I'll show you in a second.
Did they ship their hay or feed hay there, local hay?
So there was a contract with the company to get all the hay to ship over. So they couldn't bring all their individual hay, but they could order ahead of time. They had a selection of types of hay and types of feed that they could choose from ahead of time. So they placed their orders back in, I think it was like around March or so, March, April, in addition to packing up all their containers and shipping everything over ahead of time. So this is actually how they travel. So the horses load into these little containers that are basically like a horse trailer. So they had 2 per container. Sometimes there will be 3 depending on the particular company. But the horses load up onto this little trailer container, and then they're wheeled out to the airplane, and then they go up a big elevator and are loaded into the plane and locked in place. So they just load them all up. You can't see the front of it, but at the front, it looks just like a horse trailer inside. So they have their hay, they've got their water, and there's a little man door off to the side. So the grooms and veterinarian, there's a veterinarian on each flight. They can access the heads of the horses, check on their food, water, make sure everybody's doing okay. So they can actually just walk inside the front of that, and the horses can, just kind of hang out like a trailer. And they actually travel really well. The takeoff and landing, could be a little rough, but for the most part, the flight is actually very, very smooth compared to traveling in a trailer. And all these horses are very experienced travelers to have gotten to this level. So they've all flown before and did very, very well. So this was the equestrian park. It's called Baji Kon, which is actually Japanese for horsey things. So it's a 45-acre park, which is basically kind of in the middle of Tokyo in Setagaya, which is one of the wards or like little precincts of Tokyo. It was originally built for the 1940 Olympic Games, but those were canceled due to World War II. So it wasn't really used much over the next 20 years or so. But then it was used for the 1964 Olympics. It's owned by the Japanese Racing Association, the JRA as they're called. And the JRA is a very wealthy organization. They are the racing organization for all of Japan. Japan doesn't have a lot of show horses or any kind of competition horses, but they have a lot of racing, and it's, from what I understand, it's like $1 billion industry over there. So the JRA is its own organization. All racing is organized through them, and they have their own veterinarians. And so the JRA were basically our hosts for this Olympic Games. They put their own money into rebuilding the entire equestrian park. They actually had it ready for the 2019 test event. So they were ready to go back then, but they rebuilt most of the buildings. There's very little of it that remains that's from the original, but it was absolutely beautiful. We had really, really lovely facilities, and everyone was just wonderful. So part of the reason too that we had this group of FEI veterinarians there, I mean, there are always going to be foreign vets at these competitions, but as I mentioned, Japan really doesn't have this type of competition. They've never hosted any type of competition other than the Olympic Games. But they don't normally host competitions of this level. So they hadn't even seen this level of competition, most of their veterinarians. We had a group about 3 or 4 years ago that came to Kentucky in preparation for this. And they were a little bit starstruck when they came to Kentucky and saw, you know, how this whole thing plays out. And so they really, they were our hosts, and they were kind of our liaisons with the Japanese people and with the Japanese government, but they really didn't do a whole lot as far as, you know, taking care of horses or you know, helping much. They would sometimes work with us or work alongside us, so we were kind of educating them along the way too. But they were very, very gracious to us, and there were no holds barred on this competition with the quality of the arenas and the footing and the barns and everything, just absolutely spectacular. And they had a ton of volunteers helping and there to help, you know, all the riders and the veterinarians. So anything we needed, they offered. So
In this horse park, was there a place for horses to like hand graze or hand walk? I mean, or were they just stuck in their stalls?
Nope, I'm going to show you that in just a second. So that's
Cool.
coming up. So so they had very lovely accommodations. We had 8 brand new air-conditioned barns that were fully insulated, 330 stalls that were about 13 by 10 feet with rubber matting, you know, thick with shavings. And the insulation was just so incredible. These barns were so well built that, and the doors were like about 4 inches thick. So when we would close these doors and you would walk into the barn, it was just absolutely still and quiet, and you'd hear the background, you know, air conditioning, but you could hear horses munching. It was just like being in the barn at night. You know, it was so quiet and peaceful in all of these barns, and really just shut out, you know, all the heat and humidity and all the noise and everything from the outside world. So so it was a very peaceful, very restful situation. They were beautifully built. They had full bathrooms and showers in each barn. They had laundry facilities, human laundry facilities, and outside they had big laundry, big washing machines for stable blankets and etc. They had each team, so the barns were divided, so each team was together, and so each team would have a tack stall and a feed stall. They had their containers that had shipped over just outside the barn, so they could access all of their equipment. Because they're in the city and they have no place for manure disposal, all the manure was bagged, and it was kind of interesting because there were multiple volunteers at every single arena that would be there with their little pitchfork and shovel and broom, and they would pick up every single little piece of manure out of the arenas. Anytime a horse pooped, they were like running out there to pick it up, and then they would bag it all, and then they had to that actually has to get shipped out to dispose of it all. So that was quite a job for them. These were the wash racks outside, just showing kind of the outsides of the barn, and these beautiful buildings and lovely wash facilities. Didn't really need hot water because it was pretty darn hot. Most of it was ice water. In fact, these blue containers were big containers of ice water. This was the competition arena. So again, brand new for 2020. It had a capacity for 9,300 people. Unfortunately, we didn't have anybody there. So the only people that were allowed, there were absolutely no spectators at any events, as you may have seen from the television. But so a big, sad, empty stadium, but it was beautiful. We had probably at any given time, we would have a couple of hundred people at the equestrian park. So for the competition, we tried to make as much noise as we could to kind of make up for the big empty stadium otherwise. But it was a gorgeous arena, 100 meters by 80 meters, very large. The footing in this arena, as well as in all the others, was a sand fiber mixture. And I forgot to put in a picture of it, but there was a group from the FEI that does a lot of studies on footing, and they were out there all day long measuring the pressure and the water, so measuring the moisture content, and then making sure that there were no hard spots in the arena. So they would measure the pressure. They had a special machine that would apply pressure to the surface, and then they would measure underneath like how hard the footing was, and they would make a grid through every single arena multiple times a day, and they recorded all that, and they actually sent out all that information to the veterinarians and riders just to show that everything was up to snuff and that they had the best possible footing available. I had a whole team of people working on that every single day. So this was the park. So this is just adjacent to our barns and the arenas, was a beautiful field. They did have this cross-country schooling area where riders at certain times could go out and practice their schooling. And then they had another little park area that was actually a holdover from the 1964 Olympics, but it was meant to be for spectators to be able to come and get out of the sun and walk around a little park area, cute little bubblers that weren't in use, and this cute little owl birdhouse that I think I was the only one that used the whole time we were there. But we had these beautiful views too. So over the trees from the stadium, that's actually Mount Fuji in the background. So it was just a really beautiful spot. So right in the middle of the city, we had this little oasis and these very quiet paths you could walk on for people. The horses actually could walk through this little wooded area as well. And then there were a couple little shrines and things. The Japanese like their gardens and shrines and such. So, there were some of those.
Did you have much free time to sightsee or do these scenic walks that look amazing?
This was all within the park. So while we were in the park, we actually did have quite a bit of freedom. Outside of the park, we were on lockdown. We were in quarantine. So we were escorted from our hotel rooms down the elevator to the bus every single day. We would usually leave the hotel at 5 in the morning and usually get back about 11 o'clock at night. So between 5 and 11 p.m., we had 5 a.m., 11 p.m., we had the whole day at the park. And it was pretty quiet during the middle of the day because of the heat, which we'll talk about as well. But there was usually a break between about noon and 3 where, people just weren't riding. It was just too hot and everybody was inside. So that was a good time to kind of wander around and make use of our free time. But this was the veterinary clinic that they built on site for this. They may use it to some extent with the JRA in the future, but this was sort of a not completely makeshift, but kind of a temporary facility for any emergencies that might have come up. We had a surgical facility, we had ICU facilities. Thankfully, we didn't need the surgery, but we did use some of the stalls. We had some minor colics, medical colics, horses on fluids and such. And any horse under FEI rules that receives, so they can't receive any kind of medication while they're in competition, but they can receive some things like, Adequan, hyaluronic acid. They can get fluids, they can have some vitamins, amino acids, and gastric supplements. But if they receive anything like that, that has to be done in a treatment stall. They're not allowed to give any kind of injection in the barn. So those stalls that you see in the upper right behind us, those were actually treatment stalls. So if any horse needed to receive some kind of, non-prohibited treatment, then they got that there. But then we also had some ICU stalls in another area. So these were the schooling rings. They had a huge indoor ring that was beautiful and also air conditioned. They had the outdoor rings that were the schooling and warm up rings, and then a schooling jumper ring. And so you can kind of see from the picture on the left that cross-country area and then the woods is just adjacent to all of our schooling areas. And then the barns are just on the other side of that. So it was pretty compact. It wasn't a very big place, but there was plenty of room to move around and stretch out. The US team actually there were some additional barns that were on the other side of the street, and to avoid any kind of injuries or for safety, they had a tunnel built underneath the street to walk horses back and forth over to what they called the South Arena and the South Barn. So the US team and a couple other teams were over here just because there were of space issues. There were 3 additional barns over on the other side of the road. So they had kind of their own quiet little area, but a very lovely walkway that was all poured rubber for the walkway underneath the road. We were dealing with extreme heat situation here. This was the hottest Olympics on record, and they've been planning for this for a very long time. There have been a lot of studies that have been done over the years between Atlanta and Barcelona and Rio with heat and humidity, but this one was actually one of the highest heat and humidity combinations. So we had temperatures up to 100 degrees and then up to 92% humidity. And that sometimes was even by 9 o'clock in the morning that it would be, 95 degrees and crazy humid, so that, you're just sweating standing there. So what we did to help accommodate that, first of all the horses and riders and people, including the volunteers, were all told months in advance to start acclimatizing to high humidity. So so they were recommending people work out in the hottest part of the day. They suggested that you sit in your kitchen with a tea kettle on and having the steam going. That seriously was one of the recommendations, just to try and get used to the humidity. Told people to wear, extra layers when they were out running and try to, sweat as much as you could to get used to it. So they took these wet globe bulb thermometer readings throughout the day, and they would modify competition and training times based on that. So they tried to, think in advance, prepare for that. We also had the air conditioning in the stalls, as I mentioned, and then at every arena we had these misting tents. So at any time, a horse rider could just like walk through, stand underneath the misting tent, and there was ice water that was blown out by fans that would just, keep the horses misted and in the shade. So that really helped out, and those were going throughout the day from 6 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. We also then had thermography cameras out on course, and so this is watching a horse, galloping by, and we could actually measure their, and it was pretty accurate. Could get a pretty good reading on their body temp just based off the thermography camera. So we could kind of pinpoint which horses were maybe at risk and just kind of give them a little heads up, say, hey, your horse is getting pretty hot. You should probably just go cool off. So we were keeping really close tabs on all of that. So this is showing, you're asking about the grazing area. So in this park, yeah, the horses every day would be out grazing, hand grazing, rolling in the grass. I loved this picture of the stallion that was just enjoying the sunshine, having a nice bite to eat. And so, yeah, the horses were very, very happy. They were happy outside. They were happy in the barns. Yeah, probably the most content horses I've ever seen at any kind of horse show. So they were very well cared for. They were getting their massages and their beamer blankets and all their physiotherapists. There were multiple physiotherapists. Some of the teams brought their own physiotherapists, especially the Europeans have team physios that come with each team that work on those horses all day, acupuncture and massage and chiro, and then the various allowed or non-prohibited treatments. So shockwave is not allowed at FEI competition, and class 4 lasers are not allowed. You can't do any acupuncture has to be dry needles. They can't be injected with any substances, but within that range, they've got a lot of freedom. So so a lot of hands-on body work was done. Those horses, you know, multiple times a day. So so they were kept feeling their best at all times, and pretty happy crowd. So unfortunately, we didn't get to attend the opening and closing ceremonies, but since I was the lucky one that had this great view from my room and could see the stadium, these pictures were actually taken from my room. So so we had, I kind of had the party room, and we called it the rooftop bar. We weren't allowed anywhere else in the hotel, including the restaurants. So anything we did was back in our rooms, but we had a little opening and closing ceremony party, and so we got to see some of that. We got to watch the fireworks from the room, so that was pretty cool. That was much of the rest of the Olympics as we saw. So otherwise, it felt kind of strange because we had so few people and so few horses at any given time. You know, we had up to about 200. You know, if we'd have dressage and eventers or eventers show jumpers, but it felt like kind of a small private show, which, you know, had some of its advantages too. Oops. So so this was the jog, and so this is what we call the formal horse inspection. And at most competitions that I work at, you know, there's kind of a wide range of outfits that we see. Today we were doing the jog for the event here in Kentucky, and saw some mini skirts and some high-heeled boots, and, you know, a few people wearing kind of, you know, more barn clothes, and a couple people wearing suits, a couple of the men wearing some nice suits and ties. So, but then each country for the Olympics got to choose their jog outfits. So, so I always think it's entertaining to kind of take a look at some of the different outfits that are chosen. Some very, very nice, and some, you know, a little weird, but
What country was the red pajamas at the
so the
top?
red pajamas, that was Belgium. So the top two, so yeah, so they were wearing the kind of funny pajamas. This guy was from Morocco. I thought he was pretty handsome looking. And then Japan, and then the Netherlands in the tan. So, but this was what was really cool about having such a small event and no spectators, and you know, just having all of us working at the rings at all times. So, you know, I had a backpack with you know, veterinary supplies, but I was next to every ring, you know, training all through the competition, every bit of competition. So anytime horses were out, we were out there. So we were standing right next to all the best horses in the world. One of the really cool things is because all these countries are so integrated, and you know, for example, like I said, the Asian and African riders, a lot of them are training and working in Europe. You know, the Japanese were working with a British coach, actually William Fox Pitt for their eventing coach. So the common language actually was English for almost everyone that was there, because they were all from different countries working with each other, which was great for me, because then basically I got to listen in on everybody's lessons and coaching, and watch them train every day, and you know, get to see all the best and how they do their training. So it was pretty cool. This was just some more outfits at the jog. And then just for those of you that haven't ever seen what a horse inspection, so this was the first horse inspection for the eventing team. This was actually one of the US riders. She was actually our alternate for the eventing team, Tammy Smith and her horse Mybaum. But this is basically how a horse inspection works. We have the head veterinary delegate over here on the left, Yves Rossier. And so we walk around the horse when we're doing this, just, you know, look for any swellings, check their shoes, make sure nothing looks amiss. Then they jog down, and they have to turn around a flower at the end, and they have to turn to the right so we can see the horse, and then they jog back, and then they jog past us. And so what we're looking for in a horse inspection is not, most of these horses are not 100% sound. And I have to say, in my practice, you know, on a daily basis, there are very few horses in this world that are 100% sound. You know, you can always find some little thing, you know, a little stiffness, a little soreness, something going on. So it's really frustrating when we do pre-purchase exams, because, you know, there are very few horses that are absolutely 100% perfect. So including these horses who have, you know, worked for years at the highest levels of sport in all the disciplines to get to where they are. These aren't, you know, young horses. You know, most of the horses at the Olympics are going to be in their teens. Some of these horses have been to multiple Olympics. So these horses have some miles on them, and they get the very best care to keep them feeling their best. But we're not looking for a horse to be absolutely 100% sound in a jog. What we're looking for is a horse that looks like they are sound enough to compete, that doesn't have any signs of an injury. You know, because these horses are older, we expect there might be a little stiffness, there might be some arthritis. But what we're concerned with are any kind of major injuries, you know, where we could have a breakdown injury or something like that, or a horse that's obviously lame. So we don't want a horse that's obviously lame competing, and we watch really closely, again, for any evidence of a swelling tendon ligament injury that might be made worse with competition. So before they even start, we're jogging them just to make sure they're sound enough to start the competition. But then we're also watching them throughout the competition. So in the eventing, we see them throughout the dressage, and then in their warm-ups for the cross country, during the cross country, after cross country, and then they have to jog again before the show jumping, before the final phase. For the dressage and the show jumpers, they just jog the one time for the team. They did also have an individual jog for the individual competition. So for those dressage people out there, this was Pumpkin, Charlotte Dujardin, and Pumpkin, her cute little horse, who was the sweetest little thing, and I think was kind of a YouTube sensation. But I thought it was also kind of funny. I took these pictures on the bottom because that's Isabel Wirth and her horse, Bella Rosa, who is huge compared to Pumpkin, but those were the top two finishers in the dressage. And they kind of look alike, except by the size. You know, it looks like kind of mama and baby there, but I just thought it was kind of a fun contrast. So the dressage, very exciting finish for the U.S. They had a really great showing, and I don't know how many people saw this. This was my favorite of all time, is Stefan Peters doing his freestyle, and he didn't score the best technically, but it definitely had the best show appeal. And this also was kind of an internet sensation with his music. Get some back. Sorry, go over here. Let's fast forward to some of the fun stuff. So we're getting a whole new group of people interested in dressage by seeing this kind of freestyle. It kind of brings it to light. My daughter is 18 and not a horse person, and she and her friends really thought this was cool, that the horse was, you know, dancing to, you know, some fun music. So.
Did you see the Snoop Dogg?
Yeah. So yeah, I saw all of it. So yeah. So yeah. So there were some great freestyles. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Look at that tail. The tail.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, this is the part. This is what's on YouTube right now. So you can kind of see the crowd. That was like all the people. Those were like the grooms and the support people and, you know, some of the volunteers. That was pretty much all we had for an audience. So. So very well timed, awesome freestyle. It was a lot of fun. Yep. Anybody wants to see the rest, it's on YouTube. So this was our cross country, the Sea Forest cross country course. So this was the only time we really got to go off site, get a bus out. It was about an hour drive to get out here. And this is actually the Bay of Tokyo here. And so they've created, this actually is a landfill. It's a giant garbage dump. And in the lower corner here, you can kind of see along the bottom edge there, that's actually an active landfill site. So they're still dumping garbage and building up this island. So they made these islands out in the bay and then decided, hey, that'd be a great place to have a park. So then they basically built this park over the top of it and then converted that to a cross country course. So this was just kind of a fun aerial view. So the bottom half here is the cross country, what they called the Sea Forest cross country. And then there's this waterway in between there. That's actually where they had the rowing competitions there. And then they've got some industrial parks, you know, kind of off to the side there. So we were in preparation for the cross country.
About 15 minutes left.
Okay, yep, I'm wrapping up here. So in preparation for the cross country, we were out there for a couple of days running scenarios, making sure that we had all of our plans in place. This was actually a little human ambulance that could go cross country. And then we had the horse ambulances and we had those stationed around the course. But we were kind of making preparations for the cross country. So we were out there for a couple of days with our veterinary team. This is our vet team that was enjoying the beautifully designed cross-country jumps, and you know, the artwork on all of it was gorgeous, beautifully carved, but with a great view of downtown Tokyo. So that was pretty amazing. We had to transport all 100 horses from the Bajikon Equestrian Park to the Sea Forest course. So we had 20 vans that loaded up all these horses very efficiently. And there was temporary stabling. They came over the night before. So they came over Friday night and spent the night in temporary stabling, again, air conditioned. But then we ran cross country early on Saturday morning, started early, and we were finished before noon to avoid the hottest part of the day. And then right after that, all those horses were transported back to the equestrian park the same way.
How long was the ride?
It was about an hour drive, and those are JRA vans. So they own all these vans that are all air conditioned. So so they were all transported by box, you know, big box stalls in the vans out to the Sea Forest and then back. So it was kind of a logistical nightmare, but they had it all planned really well, and it went really quickly and very efficiently. So it was good for everybody. So cross country day, very hot, sunny day. Again, beautiful views of the Tokyo skyline, which made for great pictures.
Did you take that picture?
Yeah, yep. And then
You need to submit that to the AAP for the convention. Seriously, at the beginning, you know how they do that?
Oh,
Send it to Sally Baker. She would love that.
Yeah. So this was, and then I was at this jump. This was called the Ditch and Rails, or what we call in eventing the coffin. This was Boyd Martin and his ride through the coffin jump. He had a beautiful ride through there. This is Ollie Townend and Cooley's masterclass, who was in first place until an unfortunate pin broke and cost him some penalties. This was the cool down area. So again, it was very hot and humid. They shortened the course. Normally a course of this level would be 11 minutes and they shortened it to 8 minutes. And the horses actually did really well. They were all very well conditioned. There were a couple of horses that were pretty hot coming into the box, but they all actually recovered extremely well. So there weren't really any issues. They had these great misting tents. And so they were all standing in front of these nice misting fans and cooled off with ice water. So they cooled down really quickly. And again, better than most competitions, you know, where it's cooler. These horses were really well prepared for this. So. And they also were getting, you know, so in the box, this is what we call the D box. These horses are all getting TPRs. So this was actually one of my friends here, and this is Chipmunk, owned by Michael Jung, who's one of the top horses in the world. And so we had multiple vets that were working in the tent and monitoring horses, doing TPRs during the cool down to make sure that they were recovering well. And we had thermography cameras out on the course as well to make sure that none of the horses were overheating. If there were a couple of stops on the course, and so we also had cooling tents out on course and emergency personnel that went out to try and help horses stay cool if they had to be held on course. They spared no expense with the decorations for Tokyo. There was over $1 million worth of these beautiful bonsai trees that were around the course. And there was a special little gardener that would come, you know, each day and take care of his little bonsai trees and you know, gave them lots of loving care. But they did a really beautiful job with all of the decorations everywhere. The jumps were gorgeous. These were some of the show jumps, you know, just beautifully painted. And it was really cool. Every single jump in every single competition, the eventing, the cross country, all the show jumping, each jump had some sort of historical significance and tied to Japanese culture. So they had some really neat jumps and they had a story for each one. This was the individual gold show jumping winner, Ben Mayer. And this is just what a gold medal jumping round looks like. So this is pretty cool. Horses are pretty amazing. This was some of the medal ceremonies. So we got to see all the Olympic medals there. This was our show jumping team got a silver medal, which was pretty spectacular. And then our dressage team also got a silver. And then this was with, the owners of Stefan Peter's horse, Jerry Yang and his wife Yukiko were there. And so we got to take a picture with the billionaire founder of Yahoo. The Japanese people were wonderful hosts. They were just very, very sweet, very kind. They are very strict with their rules. You don't step anywhere out of place or out of line. Everybody's in a perfect rows when we're lining up for the bus or anything else. You don't step off the curb. Nobody jaywalks. So, but they were very wonderful and they were all very excited to have us there and just said multiple times, you know, how happy they were that we had come. They all wanted to get pictures with us. So all these were, you know, pictures where they came up and said, oh, can we take a picture with you? And, you know, they loved taking their pictures. So it was very sweet and just a wonderful, wonderful experience with the Japanese people and all of our, you know, our great veterinary team. We had a blast. The food was a little strange. There were a couple nights that we splurged and got some really nice sushi back at the hotel. But at the end of our trip, when we were officially out of quarantine, we did go to some restaurants. And so they had horse meat on the menu and eel and some really weird, nasty stuff. And most of the food they served us at the compound was stuff that some people liked, but you didn't really know whether you were eating a plant or an animal or what kind of part and various textures. So it was a little strange. Not a big fan of Chinese or Japanese food. So oops, let me see if I go back. So this was our friends, my veterinary friends from Belgium and the US and Mexico. And we've worked together before. So we had a great time catching up and enjoying what we could of Tokyo, either in the room or the last couple days. We had some fun around the clinic. We just had a blast. You know, everybody just, you know, is such a great team. And I think that's kind of how we all ended up there, is because a lot of us had worked together at Tryon and got along really well at Tryon and just made the most of a difficult situation there. So we had a really great crew of people and had a ton of fun.
How do you get one of those stuffed horses?
Oh, those were special gifts. So yeah, those were actually, we really couldn't get any souvenirs. There were very few souvenirs around, and we couldn't really go out to many places. But even when we could, there wasn't a whole lot for Tokyo souvenirs. We did have also the veterinarians. These are some of the vets, also some of the grooms from different countries, some of the team vets from other countries. So we had a very international group that got together every day at 1 o'clock, the hottest part of the day. And we did a boot camp with Kurt Selberg, who's from Colorado State, who's, as you can see, big buff, he's got Thor tattooed on his bicep. So, so he was our boot camp leader. And so we worked out every day, worked really hard. But this guy in the lower right, my workout buddy from Latvia. So that was fun because we had a very international crew that hung out together. So. And I think that was it. So any questions?
That was about perfect. We have 5 minutes left.
All right.
Well, you guys, I say unmute yourselves and just ask your questions. We have a small group, and I don't see anything in the chat. If you don't ask questions, I will continue to ask. So someone says this was amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, if there are not a lot of questions, I just wanted to say thank you. This was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
Just wonderful.
Who
Thank
were
you so
the
much.
US vets, the other US vets? I saw Wade Tierney there.
So he was part of our FEI team. So the team vets, so for the eventing was Susan Johns, and Tim Ober for show jumping.
Sure, yeah.
Yep. And and then so the other vets from the US, we had Bill Hay from Tryon, who was our head surgeon. Who else? Let's see. We had Kim Snyder from Wellington. She was actually one of our team leaders. So she works in the Wellington area. I'm blanking now. So what else do we have? John Foreman from Illinois, from the University of Illinois. So yeah, I think. And Kurt Selberg, who was our imaging specialist. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Did any horse have to stop competition because of the awful heat and humidity?
No, actually they did really well. Like I say, even on the cross country, none of the horses had to stop for any of those reasons. So there were some minor, cuts, injuries, couple mild colics. One horse, sadly, a dressage horse that developed laminitis from the trip and had to go home. But yeah, and then there was one unfortunate horse on cross country who had a previous injury. It was an older horse that had a previous injury that had a breakdown on cross country. But otherwise, the horses did really, really well. So some minor things here and there.
Well, this was amazing. I think you did such a great job that there's just no questions. And I just interrupted, throughout and asked questions. So I guess we want to thank you. And we might have you back because I thought the way you presented and the fact that even now you're at an event is just so interesting. Like they said, the behind the scenes look is something that a lot of people just don't have access to. So knowing what goes on from flying the horses over there to, if you've never gone to Rolex or Land Rover or something and seen the jog, or I think the part where on cross country day is really interesting too. So we might call on you in 2022 to speak to us again. So
sounds good.
Thank you and have a good night, and enjoy, do a good job down there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for doing this with us, and IDCTA really appreciates your time and effort and this wonderful presentation.
And then how long will it be before it gets uploaded? How long does it take to get to the website?
It takes a day.
A day. Oh, that's good. Okay.
24 hours is all it takes.
Nice.
Sometimes I have it up in a couple of hours, but I may not tonight. So
yeah,
I'm going to turn it off and
all right.
we are good to go.
Thanks, everyone.